Greetings and welcome to Freedom News, FrihetsNytt, with me, Victor Eriksson. What would you say if I said that we're going to talk about the biggest heist that has ever taken place in history? I'm not talking about a single bank robbery, a giant fraud, but a big heist that has been taking place for several decades and that has encompassed billions of people, especially in the Western world. This is the foundation of the talk today, where I will speak with David Rogers Webb, the man, the writer behind the book, The Great Taking. And if you ever heard the saying, you will own nothing and be happy, well, it kind of summarizes everything very good. So a warm welcome to you, David. Real great to have you here.
Victor, thanks for having me.
And we're going to talk about both this big heist, this big forgery, this big bluff that they have been using to take away our freedom, to take away our rights and what we own. But before we go into that, would you please give a quick introduction to who you are? Who are Mr. David Rogers Webb, sir?
Okay. Well, I'm an American. I grew up in Cleveland, in Ohio, and I came from a family of medical people and engineers, and both those aspects kind of feed into why I ended up with this peculiar interest in studying this. My medical grandparents were a surgeon and a nurse that went into World War I. They were in France, and so there's a kind of connection through more than a century to the beginning of this global war that we're in now, connected through my grandparents. And then my father's family, engineers, I basically grew up in the beginning of the Industrial Depression in the United States, beginning in the late 1960s and into the 1970s. And that led me with a drive to understand what was destroying us, our society, our families, our city. And I ended up going to New York as a young man and working into some pretty high-level positions in finance, in Wall Street, and eventually ran hedge funds through the dot-com bubble and bust. And it was through that period that I began to see that the scale of money creation was dwarfing any real physical activity in any economy. So it's been going on that long, more than 25 years. And then in the great financial crisis, what is known as the great financial crisis, 2008, 2009, I found that I knew we were going into a collapse, and I learned that a small broker-dealer in Florida had failed, gone bankrupt, and that the securities of the clients were encumbered in the bankruptcy of the brokerage firm. They were swept to the receiver handling the bankruptcy, and I knew that legally that should not happen. And so for me at the time, that was as serious as a heart attack, because we were going into this financial collapse at that time to understand it. So that's when I learned that something called the Uniform Commercial Code in the United States had been changed.
And what
quietly.
exactly is that?
The Uniform Commercial Code is something that is promulgated or created by industry and essentially then state governments are directed to enact it. So it's something that is not done at the federal level doesn't attract any attention. It could be done quietly in all 50 states. So they began that process in 94. The amendment was in 94, and it took until maybe 2001 for all 50 states to adopt it. And then still no one knew about it. And I saw this first sign of the operation of this in 2008. So began understanding how this was subverted. So simply for people to understand this, for 400 years from the beginning of the concept of a security, securities were personal property. And that's why it was called a security. You know, it's your personal property. If a broker was holding your security and the broker went bankrupt, that was not your problem. That was the broker's problem. You would say, I'm sorry you went out of business. Here's where you return my stuff. That's what should have happened with that little broker-dealer in Florida. What they did in 1994 with this amendment to the law at the state level was to create completely new legal concept of an entitlement. So now you don't have a property right, you have an entitlement, which is a contractual claim.
So it's like, for example, you don't really own anything. It's like you're renting it for a specific.
You have the use
time.
of it. You have the use of it for a period of time. So it was definitely a deception because they wanted people to believe that they still own their property, but legally they do not own the property. I know it's a mind-blowing thing. What they did was to maintain an appearance, because you can buy it and you can sell it and realize the gain or loss. You receive the dividends. One of their big problems was, how do we maintain the appearance that they can still vote the shares and that they receive a proxy statement even though they don't own it? And they spent a lot of time on that. But meanwhile, because so then structurally all the securities are held on a pooled basis. So the other thing that happened prior to this change in the law was dematerialization of securities. So they had been
dematerialization, like for example, they exchanging it to those zeros and ones that we see at a bank account, for example.
Well, they had been paper certificates.
Okay, yeah.
And you can still get paper certificates in some jurisdictions. Not many people do, but it's still possible to do. But a paper certificate is collateral. It is property. They had to subvert that. So there was something they called the paperwork crisis in, I think it was 1968. And this was clearly an operation. In other words, a psyop.
And a psyop from the financial elite, from the bankers, the
yes, it's the people who control the financial system that orchestrate these things. Now, how do you know it's a psyop? Well, they claimed they were being overwhelmed with handling paper certificates. So they closed the stock exchange just on Wednesdays for 6 months, exactly 6 months. Then they didn't do that anymore, and they used that as a reason to dematerialize and centralize the pooling of all securities. That the entity to do that is something called Depository Trust Corp, which was not formed until 1973, so it wasn't even formed for 5 years. Somehow the markets functioned for another 5 years. Then there was no significant dematerialization until the 1980s. So for another 20 years, You know, the markets worked. So then they were, by dematerializing and holding the securities in pools, they can then be used by the industry, by essentially the brokerage firms, as their collateral under their trades. And so this is what is being done. It's being used as the collateral posted under derivatives trades, derivatives contracts.
And this is what you go through and present in the book, The Great Taking, how the system works and how they do it.
Yes. And tying it back, but it's I believe it is also being done for, people may think, well, this is just to allow them to make more money using your assets. But it is clearly going in a direction that is much darker than that has been planned and implemented relentlessly for decades.
And if we look at the history and go back to where it all started, some kind of chronological order, when would you say that this system started and what made it possible from the beginning? Was it the purchase of the Bank of England by the Rothschilds in 1815? Was it the establishment of Federal Reserve in 1913? Or was it later or even earlier than that?
Well, that's a bigger topic, which is very, very important in terms of where we are now, which is centralization of power to create money out of nothing. And I make this point in the book. It is that banking power that controls all governments, all political parties, all the media, the military, the police, and now globally. And we can go through the proofs for that it is absolutely comprehensive globally at this point. But I have to say to people, you are not your government. I think we know the governments are not accountable to the public anywhere at this point, and the people are something quite different from their governments. We have to wake up to that. The governments do not have your best interests, you know, in terms of what they're doing. They are serving other interests. So in the United States, and I talk about this in the book, that the Fed is really modeled on the Bank.
The Federal Reserve.
Yeah, the Federal Reserve.
In case some people don't know what the Fed means.
Yeah, the Federal Reserve System, and at the beginnings of this corruption, it was really happening in 1913 when the Federal Reserve System was established. And in terms of the Great Taking, a deliberate strategy. As I make the point, it's not that they need your stuff. They can create unlimited amounts of money. It's not that they need your stuff or your money. It's that they do not want you to have your stuff and your money. It is about subjugation of populations.
It's a means of control over you by controlling your property, your means of living.
Well, I'd say it's even worse than being about control, because they have control now. They have total control now. So what is happening now is beyond having total control. It is about destroying populations. So it's much darker than that we just want to control everything. People also so first people think, well, this is about that they want to make money. No, it's much worse than that. It's that they want control. No, it's much worse than that. It's that they intend that you will not exist.
It sounds like the financial equivalent of Cthulhu in the Lovecraft tales. There is a giant squid, psychological monster that dwells in the deep and controls people via metaphysics by taking mind control over them. A horror monster.
Well, our minds, this is a point in my discussions I've ended up making. We have been severed from understanding that our minds create reality. Beginning with Marx and dialectical materialism in the 19th century, this is very important that prior to that, in Hegelian dialectics, the point of Hegelian dialectics was to know the truth, to know reality through argumentation. And the understanding was that those participating in the argumentation desired to know the truth and the good and the reality. Marx could not have that. The dialectical materialism says the only good is the material world, and you can't know anything beyond the material world, so don't bother your pretty little head with that. Just focused on output and numbers and determinism.
And who controls the means of production and everything that they're talking about?
Well, it caused people to feel, yeah, I can't know anything about, I'm a realist. I'll be rooted in hard reality. It goes along with ideas of determinism and materialism. But the point is that I believe people in deep time knew that the material world is actually benevolent. The material world is not going to destroy you. What will destroy you and your family is what is created by people's minds. Okay? Now, how powerful is the mind? Literally everything we're sitting in here was created by the mind. Everything we're wearing, all our surroundings, and anyone watching this, look around where you are, unless you're out in a field somewhere. so it's the mind is very powerful, and the people that are controlling this system, they are using their minds to manifest what is happening to us, and they're using our minds as well.
And who are these actors, these people or these organizations, these institutions that are behind this, those pulling the strings and those benefiting from this system? Who would you say that these people are?
Well, it's clearly the seat of power is the central banks. It's as simple as that. And
in America as well as in Sweden and
well,
Bank of England.
it's globally. The Bank for International Settlements is they on their webpage they say that they are the central bank of central banks. Now, what is the Bank for International Settlements? It's so the City of London. Probably this began in the City of London with, and the Rothschilds are involved with that, and there are other ancient banking families, but the Bank for International Settlements was formed after World War I to collect all the reparations from Germany. So they sucked all that out of Germany. But when you think about it, what had also just happened? The collapse of the Romanov dynasty, the collapse of the the Habsburg Empire, the Turk-Ottoman Empire collapsed.
The Hohenzollern dynasty. And
so what happened to all of that wealth? Where did that go? It just kind of disappeared. Well, it is controlled by the people who control the central banks.
We know at least that the gold reserves of the Russian Empire ended up in the vaults of the Wall Street bankers like Jacob Schiff and people like that, being paid gold, stolen icons and wealth to instead send weapons and guns to the Bolsheviks.
Yes. Well, the Bolsheviks, I mean, this is another aspect of what we're in. The Bolsheviks never went away. There is continuity of control of Russia. I would argue that all of our countries are unconsciously Marxist in nature. We are Marxist. Even I'm on these calls. Well, I'll explain. I'm on these calls with people who consider themselves to be anarcho-capitalists,
libertarians,
or libertarians. But what are they about? They're about their stuff. They're about how they're going to hide their stuff, or how they're going to make money in the midst of what's happening now. So they are still materialists, and that's what I mean by Marxist. It's materialist, that you can't know anything beyond materialism, so don't bother. And but what is happening here is really driven by it's way beyond materialism. You see, when I say they don't need your stuff. So it's not about materialism. They don't need your stuff. They also have complete control. They do not need more control. So it is.
Would you say that these are Marxist because they don't sound very materialistic in this way?
Well, I'm saying the people that created Marxism are beyond that. Marxism was to be imposed upon the psyche of populations. But they operate on another level in terms of their intention. So I know this is a lot to take in.
But you have to start somewhere at least. But if we look at these different central banks, we know, for example, that the Federal Reserve, the American central bank, is it's not owned by the public or the politicians or the state. It's privately owned, if I understand
and
correctly.
all central banks globally are privately owned.
Also the one here in Sweden as well.
Yes. Okay. And including in Russia. They may have the appearance of being a public, in every case they have the appearance of being a public institution, but they are privately controlled. So we see the same thing in Russia. The building is owned by the state, but it actually operates for international financial interests. So the Russian central bank is a member of the BIS. The Chinese central
and BIS, could you please?
The Bank for International Settlements,
okay, yes,
which is this entity that is wholly unaccountable to any other authority. It's an authority unto itself. It has its own military, essentially.
So, but when we say that they are quite atomized, that every bank is, like you say, their own kind of institution, their own power
No,
bubble.
they are all part of a centralized control system. The BIS is the central bank of central banks. And so this is about centralization of power, which again is very strange. Centralization, if you think about it, it is not found anywhere in creation otherwise. It is antithetical to creation itself, centralization of power and control. Reality, creation itself, is uncontrollable. Uncontrollable, unlimited, limitless variation. All life is this, and but the people with this penchant for centralization and power and control, they seek to destroy whatever they cannot control, and that is how it is antithetical to creation itself, and it is why it ultimately fails, also.
We're gonna turn over to how it looks like in Sweden and give get David's perspective on how this system works in Sweden. But for you who's watching this right now, I want to inform you that FrihetsNytt is not only a Swedish webpage. We have translations of our articles also in English. So if you want to read about what's happening in Sweden, our analysis of what's going on in the world, you are more than free and welcome to become a subscriber. We need all the support we can get. We've been harassed by the banks here in Sweden. We've been denied bank accounts and the ability to accept donations. So if you want to get to read everything that we have on our webpage, and a lot of our articles are behind paywall. So if you want to be able to read everything, go down to the link below and read about how you become a subscriber. Believe me, it's worth everything. But you, David, you have seen everything from inside in America especially, even though it's global. But for some reason you ended up here in Sweden. Could you just please tell us quickly about how you came to decide to stay here, and if you've seen the difference or similarities between what's happening in America and what's happening in Sweden?
Yeah. Well, so when I learned about the failure of this little broker-dealer and realized how property ownership had been subverted in the U.S., I started looking for where could it be otherwise. And at least at that point in 2008, Sweden and Finland were unique in the world in that it was still the case that you had direct ownership of your securities. Now, what had happened...
They don't do that in the rest of Europe, in Eastern Europe and the likes.
Well, I'll come to that.
Okay,
I'll come
sorry.
to that. But so it was still possible then. Now, what had happened was in 1970, this was following the paperwork crisis. There was a G30 mandate to dematerialize securities. So Sweden always wants to do it the best, the fastest, the mostest. So Sweden did that immediately. And Sweden and Finland had the model system because I'm sure the good people in Sweden couldn't believe that it was about subverting the ownership of the property. So they did this.
We were thinking that the people that we were handing over the power and control to were just as good-natured as we are personally.
Yes. Well, they didn't know the darker ultimate purpose because this was 1970. So it wasn't apparent yet it took decades for this to unfold. So the Swedish system was the most modern in the world, electronic, but when you think about it, computer systems can be used to absolutely keep track of who owns what. So every security had a number. And that was the case when I looked upon it in 2008, 2009. I could see, yes, it's possible to own the securities directly, even though they're dematerialized. So I got on a plane to Sweden, and I was ultimately able to, it turned out I was told initially, well, you don't have a personal number, you can't have a bank account here. So I bought an apartment here so I could open accounts here.
And then you have a personal number right now?
Get a personal number, and then I was able to transfer my Swedish bonds from the U.S., custody in the U.S., to Sweden, and get my statement and see that I actually own these securities. And that was the case for just a little while. And then I learned that there was something called the Legal Certainty Group that had been formed by the EU to study how to conform Europe to the US model, to subvert ownership, direct ownership.
And the European Union was the driving force behind this?
The European Union was the driving force. I learned about this. through a friend, I was able to meet with the Minister for Financial Markets in Sweden and his state secretary, and I explained to them the significance of this. And
was it Anders Borg?
no, I actually met him once, but it was Peter Norman.
Okay.
And I mean, I was very moved that I would even be able to meet with them. And this is a great testament to at least the way Sweden was, that it was possible to meet with someone like that. And being a U.S. citizen, there's no way I would be able to meet with someone in the U.S. government, even though I have very, very deep roots there. But I was able to do that in Sweden, so I was very grateful for that. And they understood what I was saying about the significance of this, but they said, we can't do anything about this they said, if Germany will not go along with this, then maybe little Sweden won't have to do it.
But if Germany goes along with it, what happens then?
Well, Sweden, the position is, once we've joined NATO, we are just going to comply with everything that NATO implements, and that's what has happened to Sweden. This was the mistake of joining the EU to begin with. Loss of sovereignty, and there are other things that have happened since. But so I met with them. That was maybe in 2012. I went to a hedge fund conference in Zurich to warn them, and but this something later that year in 2013, or maybe it was 2014. This was something called Central Securities Depository Regulation, CSDR, was implemented in Europe, which conformed all of Europe to this U.S. model where you don't have control of your own assets. Now, but what they also had to do was subvert the local law in each country. So in Sweden, they changed the Grundlag at the same time in 2014. And I go through this in the book. In the first instance, the Grundlag says your securities cannot be used without a written agreement. So you think, oh, I'm good, I'm fine. But then down at the bottom of the paragraph, there is except, as in this other section. And then you go to that section and you don't find it. There's another except. It's nested 3 deep in these references. And ultimately you learn that if the property is transferred to another regulated entity, there isn't a need for approval. Okay. So it's deeply buried that they tell you
and if
it
you could
can't
just
be
provide
used,
an
but yes, it
example
can
of
be used.
how this transaction between different 2 entities can look like. What kind of entities are we talking about, and how will it take place to allow this kind of to surpass this agreement?
Now it is out in the open for anyone who cares to look at it. So, for example, at SEB, I had had a VP konto at Handelsbanken, but they, of course, SEB had those as well. And Handelsbanken, when this was implemented, they just eliminated them because they knew there's no point in having it anymore. You can't have direct ownership of the securities. Now you have just a service account. So, but SEB maintained an appearance that you have a VP konto. So they call it a service VP konto. So I went through telephone calls with SEB to nail down where is the property? And I eventually the person I talked with actually sounded shocked when he himself learned under my questioning that you don't have property rights to this. This is the person at SEB did not know this until they got off the phone and asked questions. Now, on the SEB site, they now have a disclosure that explains that the property is held in Brussels, Belgium, under Belgian law, in which the securities are pooled and subject to the creditors of the financial institutions. So this is how you lose control of the property, is that it is used as collateral within the financial complex. And if there is insolvency, so this is a simple point. If you ask your broker or custodian, if your institution fails, can I reclaim my property out of the insolvency? And the answer is no. It's as simple as that. The answer is no. You get what is left after the secured creditors that have claims in the insolvency after they take the property. So this SEB, it's now there to see. On the SEB website, you have to look for it, and even the employees of SEB won't really understand this or the implications. But it means that as a Swedish citizen, you can no longer own a Swedish government bond.
Yeah, I'm afraid we know that, because we can only own bonds at the private banks, not the Riksbanken or our central bank. But you told us right now that you've spoken to the Minister of Finance, you've spoken to a bank employee, but you must have had some contact with the average Joe of Sweden as well. How have they reacted when you have told people about this system? And have you experienced that they're gaining more and more clarity of how the system works?
Oh, I'd say I've had more in terms of the scale of experience like that in the U.S. Because I was making, after the book came out, I was contacted by people in the U.S. that wanted to work at trying to revert the law at the local level in the States. And because it could be so easily done, because the way the property is used is these simple exceptions, where you're told it is your property, except in these circumstances it's not. Mm-hmm. So all one would need, it was subverted in the local law, it would simply be a matter of striking those exceptions. Mm-hmm. So we've had the experience of fighting these battles at the state level. And I've spoken to rooms of people where there was enormous reaction to learning about this. But the control of the banking lobby is down to the local level in the United States. It's not just the federal level, it's the state level, it's even at the city level. Sweden, it could be changed here by changing the Grundlag. But as we can see, the government here is, like all the other governments, is completely unaccountable, even if people demanded that.
And right now they are working to change the Grundlag that would make it nearly impossible for Sweden to leave the European Union, for example, because it has written down that Sweden is a part of the European Union as a part of our Grundlag, our constitution. Yes. Yes. And right now they're trying to change it. So when they vote in the parliament, Riksdag, yes, it will take a lot more support to have a Grundlag constitution changed. So right now they're doing right now what you're talking about, but they're doing it the opposite way, against the people.
Yes. I think people in Sweden are, they don't experience their personal power to act and change things. I mean, I love Sweden. I'm here. I'm still here, and I think the people are very good, kind people. It's a major part of the reason I'm here is the quality of the people, but they are unconsciously Marxist. They're materialists. They expect someone else to handle things for them. So there isn't I've come to say to people lately, the answer is not out there, it's in here. That's the hard thing we're all going to be facing, is that the cavalry isn't riding to the rescue. You know, it is, we each individually have to choose to do something.
If you want something done, do it yourself, or be prepared to do it yourself.
Yes.
So I think we could have a giant seminar session or series of interviews about this, but we'll have to tie it up for this time. But do you have any parting words for our viewers? And we will get back to this topic in a following.
Okay. Well, I think a couple of very, very important things I want to leave people with. If you want to be engaged in things that are very important, one is Sweden must not give up the krona. Absolutely must not join the euro. That will be complete loss of sovereignty for the country, because as long as Sweden can create krona, Sweden can, in this financial collapse that is coming, Sweden can stabilize the society, the pension system, the banking system. The second thing is that Sweden avoided being forced into the European Banking Union. And this was, again, something that began after the last financial crisis to push all of Europe into this new banking union. Because of a heroic guy at the Riksgälden who wrote a memo basically saying this would, if this is done, Sweden would lose the ability to save its own banks if you do this. And as of now, Sweden's banks are much stronger than the banks in Europe. So the resources of Sweden would go to these other banks. So it's very important. If Sweden were forced into the banking union at the 12th hour here, it is then possible that Swedish banks would be collapsed in the crisis. Sweden would have no ability to act to save those banks. The other thing that's very important, the one thing we have going for us here is the Riksgälden guarantee of bank deposits. We must not lose that. Now, what that means, that is a direct Treasury guarantee of those bank deposits. That is now unique in the world. Everywhere else, it is a very thinly capitalized insurance scheme. That's what you have under the banking union. There, it is a tiny amount of money, like I think for all of the EU, it's about 300 billion euros, which is nothing. That's gone in the first nanosecond of the first bank failure. So Sweden can create the money to honor the bank deposit guarantee to stabilize the society, but not if the krona is lost and not if Sweden is forced into the banking union.
Thank you very much for these parting words, David. It was a great pleasure to have you here, and we'll make sure to get a follow-up interview, and we will keep up with this conversation and this topic. But as you might hear, dear viewers, it's such a large topic and discussion that you cannot just fill it out in one interview. So thank you very much for being with us here, David. It has been a great pleasure.
Thank you, Victor.
And thank you very much for being with us here today. If you want to keep following FrihetsNytt, just look up frihetsnytt.se. Everything will be able to be read in English. But also look up us at YouTube, Spotify and Rumble, because we are there as well, where you can see interviews and discussions like the one you've seen right now. I hope to see you again pretty soon.